The fancy dinner my husband said was to honor my family turned out to be a silent execution. His lawyer put the divorce papers right in the breadbasket, in front of my parents. Everyone thought I would cry, beg, be ashamed. Nobody knew the $180 million contract he's signing tomorrow morning has to go through me. My name is Sienna Lopez, and I was being celebrated. At least, that was the lie my husband, Preston, had sold me. The Lakeview Conservatory isn't just a restaurant. It's a statement. It sits on the edge of the Chicago River, a temple of glass and steel where the cutlery is heavier than your conscience and the waiters move with the silent, predatory grace of sharks. This was Preston Hale's world. Tonight, he had supposedly decided to let my family into it, to celebrate you, Sienna, he'd said, his hand resting on the small of my back, a proprietary gesture I used to mistake for affection, and to honor your family for all their support. So they came, my family, Papa, his hands still rough from a lifetime of installing custom cabinetry, looked stiff and uncomfortable in his best suit, the one he wore to weddings and funerals. Mama clutched her good purse, her eyes wide as she took in the soaring ceilings and the quiet, crushing wealth of the other diners. My sister, Mariella, a pediatric nurse who could handle a trauma code without blinking, looked like she wanted to bolt. And my cousin, Leo, who drove a delivery route for a living, just kept muttering, Madre mia, this is something else. They were good people, the best people. And they were trying so hard, their Sunday best looking painfully out of place against the bespoke armor of the Chicago elite. I hadn't dressed for battle. I wore a simple navy sheath dress, what I'd worn to the office. Preston had insisted it was just a quiet family dinner. His mother, Judith Hale, was also present. That should have been the first warning. Judith rarely dined with the Lopezes, unless it was a command performance. She sat opposite me, a vision in winter white, a pearl necklace glowing against her surgically smooth skin. She smiled, but it never, ever reached her eyes. The sommelier had just retreated when Preston stood, lifting his champagne flute. The heavy crystal caught the light. To the Lopez family, he began, his voice smooth, curated, the one he used for shareholders, and especially to my wife, Sienna. He paused, scanning the table, his gaze landing on Papa. Thank you for raising such a truly hard-working woman. Hard-working, not brilliant, not cherished, not his partner, hard-working. The word hung in the air. A label for a good employee, or a horse? Mama beamed, missing the insult. Papa just nodded. Slowly, Judith sipped her champagne. It is so important, she chimed in, her voice a low, aristocratic hum, to understand where one comes from, to appreciate one's own proper place in the world. She was looking at me, and then the performance began. A man approached our table. He was older, with a shock of silver hair and a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second, sterner skin. He wasn't a waiter. His eyes were too cold. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. He stopped directly behind my chair. This was Arthur Klein, the Hale family's personal attorney, the man they sent to make problems, and people, disappear. Preston didn't even look at him. He was looking at me. Arthur Klein reached into his briefcase and produced a thick, leather-bound folder. He didn't hand it to me. He placed it, with a soft, definitive thud, directly in the center of the table, right between the untouched breadbasket and the floral arrangement. Mrs. Hale, he said. His voice was like gravel, completely devoid of emotion. He never called me Sienna. This is the asset settlement. Mr. Hale wanted to ensure full transparency before both families. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air from my lungs, from the entire room, the low hum of conversation from other tables, the distant clink of silverware. It all faded. I watched, as if in slow motion, as Papa's spine went rigid. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a public shaming. This was a rich man's way of saying my father's daughter was being returned. Goods damaged, in front of the very family who raised her. Mama's face bloomed with a hot, painful flush of humiliation that I knew would scar her for years. Across from me, Mariella's hand gripped her water glass. Her knuckles white, her eyes, dark and furious, were locked on Preston, and I could see the raw, unfiltered desire to lunge across the table. I could feel the shift in the room. The couple at the table to our left, celebrating what looked like an anniversary, had stopped talking. Their forks were paused mid-air. They were watching. We were the evening's entertainment. Judith Hale, for her part, performed a delicate, startled gasp. Her hand, glittering with diamonds, flew to her throat. "Preston, darling," she whispered. "What is this?" But her eyes, those cold, calculating blue eyes, were not surprised. They were relieved. The mess was finally being cleaned up. Preston finally turned his full attention to me. The warmth he'd feigned just moments before was gone, replaced by a chilling, corporate indifference. He looked at me not as the woman he'd vowed to love, but as the final item on a hostile agenda. "It's all very generous, Sienna," he said, his voice flat. "You will be provided with a 90-day transition stipend, which Arthur calculated based on your former salary, before I'd quit to support his ambitions. The house, as you know, is a Hale Meridian corporate asset, so you'll need to vacate by the 1st of the month. The car is leased through the company, of course." He gestured to the folder. "It's all standard. It's clean. Will you sign?" The shock was a physical blow, a fist in my stomach that stole my breath. I felt the burn of tears, hot and acidic, behind my eyes, but I refused. I would not cry. I would not give him, or his mother, or the gawking diners the satisfaction. I swallowed. I swallowed the metallic taste of betrayal, the humiliation, the sudden, icy fear. I forced my voice to be steady. It came out as a whisper, but it was clear. "You waited," I said, looking right at him. "You waited until my mother and my father were sitting at your table to do this." He shrugged. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement of his shoulders, a gesture of profound, bottomless indifference. "I wanted them to see that I'm still being fair," he replied, the lie sliding easily from his tongue. "I wanted them to know I'm handling this with integrity. Integrity." The word was a slap. I tore my gaze away from his, from this man I suddenly didn't know at all. I looked past my family's stricken faces, past the whispers and the stares. My eyes found the massive, floor-to-ceiling window that gave the restaurant its name. Down on the street, parked in the no-stopping zone right by the entrance, was Preston's private convoy. A black sedan idled, the light from the street lamp glinting off the silver, stylized logo on its door, an H intertwined with an M, Hale Meridian Ventures, the name of his family's vast, untouchable empire, the name that had just tried to crush me. And in that instant, the shock didn't curdle into despair. It sharpened into something else, a sudden, vivid, and incredibly dangerous clarity. I had seen that name just this morning, not on a car, but in a highly encrypted, time-sensitive file, a file detailing a $180 million acquisition that was set to close in the morning, a deal that was currently sitting on my desk, waiting for a final, anonymous risk assessment, a deal that could not, and would not, happen unless I, Sienna Lopez, said it could. To my husband, I was an administrative specialist, a girl from Pilsen who'd landed a lucky marriage and now had a quiet, unimportant office job to keep her busy. He thought I coordinated schedules, ordered supplies, and maybe, on a good day, managed some light bookkeeping for a small-time consulting firm. He liked that. It was simple. It fit his narrative of the competent, hard-working girl he'd elevated. He was wrong on every single count. The small firm, Lumencross Strategies, was my creation. I wasn't an admin. I was the founder, owner, and the final word on every decision. The name Lumencross was my private joke. We shone a light on the dark intersections of high finance. We weren't a general consultancy. We were a boutique, ultra-discreet, and lethally effective firm that specialized in one thing: identifying and restructuring high-risk, high-value mergers and acquisitions. When a deal was too complex, too dirty, or too dangerous for a standard Wall Street bank to touch, it came to us, to the outside world. I was just Sienna Lopez, a project coordinator on the 19th floor of an old but solid building in the Loop. My office was modest, functional, with a second-hand desk and a ficus plant, but the real work happened on the 20th floor, up there, in a corner office behind 3 layers of biometric security and acoustic baffling, was where the real power sat. That office, with its commanding view of the city, was registered to Isabella West. Isabella West was the true founder of Lumen Cross Strategies. She was a legend, a ghost in the machine. She was the genius advisor no one had ever met. CEOs of pharmaceutical giants, logistics tycoons, and private equity vultures spoke of her in hushed, reverent tones. They took her calls, which came through a secure line. Her voice always modulated into a smooth, unplaceable, digital contralto. They followed her advice without question. They paid her astronomical fees, and they all went through an intermediary, a polite but firm assistant who managed her impenetrable schedule. Isabella West was the name on the door. Isabella West got the respect. Isabella West was the one who closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I, Sienna Lopez, was the only person who had ever seen her face, because she was me. I built this fortress of anonymity for one reason, Preston. I'll never forget the night, maybe 6 months into our marriage, when I showed him my business plan. I was so proud. I'd mapped out the entire concept for Lumen Cross, the market gap, the fee structure. He'd skimmed it, a small, indulgent smile on his face, the way one might look at a child's drawing. "Sienna, this is cute," he'd said, handing the tablet back to me. He'd patted my hand. "It's a really cute idea. But babe, the people who play in this space, they're killers. You're not built for that. You're not built to lead a business." He'd kissed my forehead. "Why don't you focus on a support role? Something you can manage without all this stress. A cute idea. Not built to lead." That single, condescending pat on the head was the fuel that lit my empire. He wanted a supportive wife in a simple administrative job. Fine, I would give him that. And while I was playing that part, I would build my real life in the shadows he refused to look at. I created Isabella because the world Preston lived in, the world of Hale Meridian, would never take a Sienna Lopez seriously as a power player, but a mysterious, untouchable, Anglo-Saxon-sounding ghost they'd beg for her approval. And they did. My team was small, elite, and intensely loyal. The only one who even came close to the truth was Ramon Vega. He was a brilliant kid I'd poached from a failed tech startup after I'd saved the parent company that was acquiring them. Ramon was a data savant, a digital bloodhound who could find anything. He managed the front office on the 19th floor, officially as my colleague. Unofficially, he was my gatekeeper. He'd seen the secure elevator. He'd heard the modulated voice on an internal test call I'd accidentally patched through. He'd seen the wire transfers. He was smart enough to put 90% of it together, and respectful enough to never, ever ask about the final 10. He just called me Sienna when we were on 19, and boss when we were alone. Which brought me to this morning. 12 hours before the breadbasket execution, I was in Isabella's office on the 20th floor. Ramon buzzed me on the secure line. No voice, just a text on my console. "Hot file, coming up." That meant it was sensitive. And it was on a rush timeline. He arrived carrying a locked tablet, the kind we used for clients who were paranoid. And rightfully so. "This one came in overnight from Arclight Bank Partners," he said, setting it in the secure dock. "They're fronting the Capitol, and they're spooked. They want Isabella's full risk and compliance stamp before they release funds. Timeline is 48 hours. I nodded, tapping my credentials into the console. The file decrypted. The name on the acquisition proposal was Nova Pulse Clinics, a chain of high-tech medical clinics. The acquirer, My breath hitched. Hale Meridian Ventures, my husband's company. My heart started a low, heavy drumbeat. This was it. After all these years, his world had finally collided with mine. Sienna Ramon asked, noticing my stillness. "I'm fine," I said, my voice tight. "Give me the room, Ramon, and lock the door on your way out." He nodded. No more questions. The door clicked shut. I stared at the screen. $180 million. Preston was betting the farm on this. It was his first major play since his father stepped back. His big move to prove he was the heir apparent. I scrolled through the data rooms, the projections, the financing agreements. My mind was racing. Connecting dots he couldn't possibly imagine I'd ever see. He was moving too fast. The due diligence was sloppy. He was relying on Novapulse's self-reported numbers, and they looked inflated, optimistic to the point of fantasy. He was trying to rush this through, clearly. And then I saw it. I scrolled down to the financing guarantees, the part of the deal that showed who was personally on the hook if this all went sideways. There was his signature, Preston T. Hale. He was guaranteeing a massive portion of the loan with his personal equity. And right below his, another signature, Judith Hale, my mother-in-law. She was leveraging the family's entire holdings, including, I noted with a dark, bitter smile, the beloved family lodge in Montana, the one she'd always made a point of not inviting me to. They were all in. They were exposed, over-leveraged, and blind. They were gambling the Hale legacy on a deal that smelled like bad data and desperation. I sat back in my chair, the leather cool against my skin. Sienna Lopez. The woman Preston thought wasn't built to lead, was the only person in the world who could see the iceberg. I was the anonymous, all-powerful Isabella West that Arclight Bank had hired to steer the ship. I actually laughed. A single, sharp bark of a laugh that echoed in the soundproof room. He was going to sign. He was going to bet his mother's home and his own future, all to close this deal tomorrow. And tonight, he was taking me to dinner. He was taking me to the Lakeview Conservatory with my family, to celebrate me. The man who had just served me divorce papers in front of my father didn't know it, but his entire life, his company, his reputation, his mother's precious lodge was sitting in my encrypted inbox. He thought he was divorcing a simple admin. He had no idea he was trying to fire the one person who held the kill switch to his entire world. The ride back to Pilsen was a graveyard. The three of them, Mama, Papa, and Mariella, had piled into Leo's sedan, a car that smelled comfortably of Armor All and stale coffee. I had ridden with them, refusing Preston's offer to have his driver take me wherever I needed to go. The silence in the car was heavier and more toxic than the air at the Lakeview Conservatory. It was the silence of shame. We walked up the 3 flights to my apartment. A clean, small 2-bedroom I'd kept as a contingency, a place Preston had mockingly called my little project. Now, it was my only refuge. The door had barely clicked shut behind us when the dam of my mother's restraint broke. Porque her voice was sharp, a cracked whip of pain and confusion. Sienna, ¿por qué no nos dijiste? Why didn't you tell us the marriage was broken? You let us sit there. Mija. You let us dress up and go to that place. Like fools. You let him make fools of us. She wasn't yelling. It was worse. It was a low, keening accusation. Papa didn't speak. He just walked to the window, his suit jacket still on, and stared down at the familiar, unglamorous street. He was a proud man, a man who had built a life with his hands, who had taught me that dignity was the one thing no one could take from you. Tonight, Preston Hale had tried. I could see the rigid line of my father's shoulders, and it felt like a knife in my chest. He was in pain because he felt he had been paraded, shown what his daughter had won, only to have it violently ripped away in front of him. Mama, I didn't know he was going to do that, I said, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. We were having problems, yes, but I didn't think... You didn't think Mariella burst out. She was pacing, her energy too big and too angry for the small living room. He's a snake, Sienna. A rich, entitled snake, And he did this on purpose. I'm going to call him. I'm going to go to that high-rise and I'm going to tell him what I— No, I snapped. The command sharper than I intended. Everyone froze. No. Mariella, you will not. You will do nothing. You will not call him. You will not text him. You will not go near him. Why she shot back? Because you want to protect him, after that. Because I need him to think I'm crushed. I said, the words forming as the strategy began to build itself. I need him to think I'm exactly what he wants me to be right now, a crying, helpless, humiliated woman who is going to sign his papers and disappear. My family stared at me. This was not the daughter they knew. Mija, what are you saying? Mama whispered, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. What about the house? The car. He said 90 days. What will you do? That little job of yours. That little job. My administrative post. The lie I had so carefully constructed was now a cage of their own making. They thought I was penniless, about to be homeless, clinging to a 9-to-5 admin job that paid, what, maybe $40,000 a year? Their panic? Their shame? It was all rooted in the belief that I was destitute. And then Papa spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, not looking at me, but at the glass. In our world, he said, speaking slowly in Spanish, as he always did when his heart was heavy, a man works to provide. He works so his daughters don't have to suffer. People's daughters. They marry to be supported, to be safe. Why, Sienna? Why did you have to suffer this? It was not a question. It was a statement of his failure. And it broke me. That single sentence was the embodiment of every sacrifice he'd ever made, every 16-hour day he'd worked, every insult he'd swallowed. His daughter had made it. She had married the American dream, the white picket fence, the big money in the sky dream. And tonight, that dream had not only died, it had turned around and spat in his face. His daughter was being sent back, a failure, my pride, my carefully guarded secret. My entire life's work, it all paled in comparison to the pain in his voice. My phone vibrated. It wasn't a ring. It was a silent, insistent buzz in my pocket. A different phone. Not the personal one Preston knew about, but the encrypted one that lived in my purse. I pulled it out under the table. My family still lost in their own circle of misery. The screen was black, save for one white, coded line of text. It was from Ramon, R.V. Red flags all over Nova Pulse. The numbers don't match. Insurance liabilities are buried, deep. Inflated valuation. Looks like a pump and dump. Need Isabella's eyes on this. Tonight, urgent. I stared at the message, and then I looked up at my family. I looked at my mother. Her face aged 10 years in 2 hours, already calculating how many extra shifts she could pick up cleaning houses. I looked at Mariella, vibrating with a protective fury that could only hurt us, and I looked at Papa, his back to me, a proud man made to feel small by a boy who had never worked for anything. In that instant, the professional and the personal fused. They became one and the same, a single, cold, white-hot point of pure rage. Preston's public execution wasn't just about a clean balance sheet, it was a class statement. It was Judith Hale's entire philosophy made manifest. I remembered her, crystal clear, at our engagement party, pulling me aside. You must understand, Sienna, she'd said, fixing her gaze on my mother, who was laughing too loudly with her cousins. The Hales have a certain standard. We are a legacy. Try to remember that. This divorce, staged like a public execution, wasn't just to get rid of me. It was to erase the stain of the Lopezes. It was to prove to her world that the experiment was over, the trash was being taken out, and the legacy was secure. They thought they were divorcing a hard-working admin. They had no idea they had just declared war on Isabella West, and they'd done it on the one night she had their entire legacy in her hand. I'm sorry, I said, my voice suddenly calm, clear. My family looked up. I'm so sorry you were put through that, but I promise you. I walked over and put my hand on my father's shoulder. His muscles were rock hard. I will handle this. I have my job. I will be fine. Everything is going to be fine. He just nodded, not believing me. He thought I was just being brave. I walked into my small home office and closed the door. I heard my mother start to cry softly in the living room. I turned the lock. I sat at my desk, the one that faced a brick wall. I pulled out the encrypted laptop and the voice modulator. I plugged them in. The system booted, secure, silent. I stared at the blinking cursor. This was no longer just about stopping a bad deal. This was no longer just about protecting a bank from a stupid investment. This was about legacy. I thought of Judith's face, smug and relieved. I thought of Preston's, cold and indifferent. He wanted a clean break before his big signing. He wanted to erase me, I decided. Right then. That I wouldn't just block the deal. That was too easy. That was Isabella's move. This needed Sienna's hand. I wouldn't just kill the acquisition. I would restructure it. I would save it. I would save his family from their own stupidity. And in doing so, I would make him crawl. I would make him walk, in front of his mother, in front of the banks, and in front of the entire world, and publicly admit that the only person on earth who could save him was the hard-working Latina girl from Pilsen he had just tried to destroy. I put on the headset. I activated the modulation. My voice dropped. The slight Chicago accent vanished, replaced by the cool, crisp, unplaceable tones of Isabella West. I initiated the secure call to Ramon. "Ramon," I said, my new voice echoing in the tiny room. "It's worse than we thought. Pull everything. I don't just want the Nova Pulse data. I want everything you can find on Hale Meridian Ventures. I want their bank covenants, their private credit lines, and I want to know the personal financial exposure of every single board member. We are blowing this deal apart and rebuilding it from the studs. Tonight, my family left hours ago. The silence they left behind was thick with their pain. Mama's tears had dried into a sort of angry resignation. Papa had just kissed my forehead before he walked out the door. A silent, heavy gesture that felt more like a burden than a blessing. Now, my apartment was quiet. The only sound the soft click of my keys. The only light the blue-white glow from the 3 monitors on my desk. Ramon was working remotely, flooding our secure server with data packets. While he dug, I did my own, simpler excavation. My hand hovered over the icon for the shared calendar I still had access to. Preston was arrogant, but his real weakness was sloppiness. He hadn't revoked my credentials yet. He hadn't even thought to. It felt like trespassing. But he was the one who had set the restaurant on fire. I was just looking for the accelerant. I clicked. His schedule for tomorrow was blocked out in a solid bar of crimson. 10 a.m. The entry read, "Final signing, ArcLight." The location was a temporary headquarters for ArcLight Bank Partners on Wacker Drive. He was moving to get the funds released for the Nova Pulse acquisition. I switched to our shared cloud drive, the one he thought I only used for grocery lists and vacation photos. He was really sloppy. A folder labeled Personal Legal sat there, unprotected, inside. I found the email chain between him and Arthur Klein. It was time-stamped from yesterday afternoon. The subject line was simply, S. Settlement. Preston's email was brief, cold, and utterly devastating. "Arthur, we must finalize with his tonight at the dinner. I want her signature on the dissolution agreement before 10 a.m. tomorrow. The bank wants a clean balance sheet. No marital assets in contention. Handle it." My breath caught. It wasn't a guess anymore. It was a fact. The entire, humiliating spectacle at the Lakeview Conservatory. My father's frozen face. My mother's shame. The pitying stares from the next table. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It wasn't the act of a man at his breaking point. It was a premeditated tactical strike. It was a line item in his acquisition strategy. He needed to sever me, the potential marital liability, before he could secure his $180 million loan. My family's dignity was just collateral damage. I dug deeper. He'd synced his messages to the drive. A thread from Judith H. popped up. It was from this evening, just before they had left for the restaurant. Her message, "Preston, I trust Arthur has the papers ready. Do not go soft on this. It is for the good of the family. She never truly fit. Darling, you know that. She never fit. The words burned hotter than any tears. It wasn't just business. It was extermination. I was the dirt Judith Hale was finally scrubbing from her pristine family line. The immigrant's daughter who had dared to marry the heir. The dinner wasn't just a legal move. It was a social cleansing. They weren't just divorcing me. They were erasing me. As if on cue. A new email pinged my personal inbox. The one Preston knew about. It was from him. Subject your transition. Sienna. Attached is the dissolution and support agreement Arthur presented tonight. It outlines the 90-day transitional stipend. I think you'll find it very generous. Generous. I opened the PDF. It was all there, the eviction notice from the condo, the demand to return the company car, the paltry sum that wouldn't even cover 3 months' rent, and then, buried in the boilerplate, I found the clause he and Arthur really wanted. Article 5, Confidentiality. It stated that in accepting the stipend, I agreed, never to disclose, discuss, or utilize any business information, operational data, or financial strategies, whether perceived or explicit, obtained during the period of the marriage. I leaned back in my chair and actually laughed. A real, sharp, startled laugh that echoed in the tiny room. He thought that was my only source of information. He thought he was locking me down with an NDA based on pillow talk, on the scraps of business he deigned to discuss in front of me. The audacity, the stunning, breathtaking arrogance. He was trying to muzzle me from repeating the snippets he'd bragged about, while the entire unvarnished, uncensored, terrifying truth of his precious deal was sitting right here on my secure server under the name Isabella West. He had no idea the woman he was trying to silence was the very woman he was paying. Through the bank, to give him the green light. Ramon's work began to populate my screen, and the sick joke turned dark. He had bypassed the sanitized data room Preston had access to. Ramon had gone into the state insurance filings, the debt registries. Boss, his encrypted message popped up. This isn't just sloppy. It's a house fire. I pulled his findings into a new window, setting them side by side with the rosy projections Preston had filed with Arclight Bank. Preston's version, a 30% growth projection, year over year, based on new clinic openings. Ramon's findings, too, no 3 major insurance carriers were quietly suing NovaPulse in Delaware court for systematic overbilling and medically unnecessary procedures. The lawsuits were under seal. But Ramon had found the filing numbers. Preston's version, healthy cash flow and manageable debt. Ramon's findings. NovaPulse was drowning. They were floating payroll on a high-interest, predatory credit line that was due in 60 days. The acquisition wasn't for growth. It was a desperate cash-out before the company imploded. By my calculation, even if the acquisition went through, the undisclosed liabilities would surface within 14 to 16 months, the company would go bankrupt, and Hale Meridian Ventures would be left holding a very expensive, very empty bag. And that's when I saw the kill shot. The Achilles heel, the personal guarantees. Preston and his mother. They weren't just guaranteeing the loan. They had signed a bridge financing agreement with a smaller, more aggressive creditor to cover the initial deposit. If, for any reason, the primary deal with Arclight was delayed, or if the bank demanded a restructuring based on new negative information, they would be required to post more assets as collateral, immediately. If the bank found out about the lawsuits tomorrow morning, they wouldn't just pause. They would demand Hale Meridian put up another 50% of the family's assets just to keep the deal alive while they investigated. It would trigger a catastrophic margin call. It would expose them. It would ruin them. I finally understood. He needed this divorce signed tonight so that when it all blew up, I wouldn't have a marital claim on whatever scraps were left. This wasn't just him leaving me. This was him shoving me off the lifeboat before the ship even hit the iceberg. The plan clicked into place, cold and perfect. I picked up my secure phone. I pressed the button for the voice modulator. The small green light flickered. indicating Isabella West was now in the room. I dialed the emergency after-hours line for the lead banker at Arclight Bank Partners, a man who knew me only as the most terrifying analyst he'd ever dealt with. He picked up on the first ring, his voice panicked. "Ms. West. Mr. Garrison," I said, my voice smooth, unrecognizable, and dripping with absolute authority. "I am halting the Nova Pulse funding, effective immediately." "What? Why?" he sputtered. "The signing is at 10 a.m. We're ready to wire. My team has uncovered significant, undisclosed legal liabilities and gross misrepresentation in the valuation," I said, my eyes tracing the lines of code on my screen. "The deal as it stands is toxic. I am invoking Lumen Cross's final review clause. I will require a direct, in-person meeting with the principals of Hale Meridian Ventures tomorrow morning to reassess." There was a choked sound. "In person. But you never— I mean, of course. Ms. West, where when?" "My office, 10 a.m., I said. "Tell them Isabella West has questions, and tell them not to be late." I hung up before he could reply. They would come. They would be terrified. Preston, Judith, and their army of lawyers would scramble to my building, expecting to meet the mythical, powerful, probably white financial wizard who held their fate in her hands. They would be walking into my office, Sienna Lopez's office. I looked at my own reflection in the dark monitor. My face was calm. The tears were gone. The shame was gone. All that was left was the ice. I whispered to the reflection, to the ghost of the woman I was at dinner. "You want a clean divorce before you sign, Preston." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "You'll sign while you're still my husband." I didn't get any sleep. Sleep was a privilege, a luxury for people who weren't actively being evicted while simultaneously holding the keys to a $180 million kingdom. At 4 a.m., I was out of my Pilsen apartment. The city was dark, the streets slick and empty. I moved through the loop as a ghost. The only sound the click of my own heels on the pavement. The adrenaline was a clean, cold-burning fuel. Ramon was already at the 19th floor office, his desk lamp a single pool of yellow in the darkness. He looked like he hadn't slept either, his eyes red-rimmed and wired, a half-empty coffee mug steaming beside his keyboard. "They're terrified," he said, skipping any greeting. "Arclight Bank has called 3 times in the last hour. They're desperate to confirm that Ms. West is still planning to meet." "Good," I said, walking past my own desk, the one with the nameplate Sienna Lopez, project coordinator. "I want you to lock down the entire NovaPulse data room, everything. External access only. When Hale's team tries to log on from their office, I want the system to be polite, and I want it to be impenetrable. Let them walk in here completely blind." "Way ahead of you," Ramon said. "They've been trying to access the files for the last 20 minutes. They must have gotten the call from the bank. Right now, all they're getting is a loading icon." I smiled. "Perfect." I took the private, key-coded elevator to the 20th floor, to Isabella's office. For the next 3 hours, I didn't just review the data Ramon had exhumed, I weaponized it. I took the raw facts, the sealed lawsuits in Delaware, the predatory credit lines, the fraudulent patient growth projections, and I wove them into a narrative. I drafted the immediate risk assessment Hale Meridian Ventures, NovaPulse Clinics. It was 12 pages long, 12 pages of precise, unassailable, and catastrophic facts. I didn't use red ink. I highlighted the key passages in a cold, sterile yellow. The passages on the personal guarantees, the passages outlining the undisclosed liabilities, the specific, arcane clause in their existing loan covenants with Arclight that this new, toxic debt would immediately violate. This wasn't just a report, it was a whip, and I knew exactly where I was going to strike. At 7 a.m., I printed 2 pristine copies. I did not, however, plan to use Isabella's office. This execution would not be performed by a ghost. I went down to the main conference room on the 19th floor. It was large, glass-walled, and looked out over the river. It was impressive in a way my admin office was not. I adjusted the blinds, letting in the weak, gray morning light. I went to the service station and found the small, brushed aluminum nameplates. I slotted the letters into the holder. Sienna Lopez. I stared at it. It looked incomplete. I took it apart and started again. Sienna Lopez, Managing Director. I placed it at the absolute center of the head of the table. Then, I went back to my desk, sat down at my normal computer, and logged into my personal email. The one Preston knew about, the one he and Judith assumed was for recipes and appointment reminders. I composed a new message. My fingers flew across the keys. To Preston Hale. Subject signing. Preston, I have had the night to review the papers. I will sign them. I let that sentence hang there, imagining the wave of profound relief that would wash over him. His problem, the inconvenient wife, was agreeing to be solved. However, I will not be bullied. I will not sign these under duress. I require my own legal counsel to be present, and I will only sign them in a professional setting. My office. Be here at 10 a.m. Bring Arthur Klein. We will finalize this, and then you can go to your meeting. I hit send. It was the perfect trap. He would read it as a pathetic, final attempt at dignity. The little admin, demanding to sign at her little job to feel important, he would be annoyed, but ultimately, he would be relieved. He would think he was coming to my office to put me down, get my signature, and then run across the street to his real meeting to sign his big deal. He would never, in a million years, suspect that the two meetings were, in fact, the same. My other phone, the secure one, vibrated. I picked it up. My parents. My heart squeezed. I had to do this. I answered, forcing my voice to be calm, strong. Mama. Mija. Are you okay? Your father? He didn't sleep. I'm fine. Mama, I'm more than fine. I lowered my voice. I just wanted you to know. I've had my lawyers look at the papers. A necessary lie. They are not happy with what Preston tried to do. They are handling it. Everything is being handled. I promise you. I will not let this family be disrespected again. I heard her let out a shaky breath. Ay, Sienna, be careful. These people are not like us. I know, Mama, I said, my gaze landing on the nameplate. They're about to find that out. I love you. I hung up and looked up. Ramon was standing in the doorway of the conference room. He was looking at the managing director plaque. Boss, he said, his voice quiet. You know, once you walk into that room, Isabella West is gone, for good. You'll be the face, their face, the one on the target. Are you sure you're ready for that? I straightened my suit jacket. A ghost is a good way to build a company, Ramon. But to run an empire, they have to see you. Even a ghost has to stand in the light sometimes. He nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. Yes, ma'am. I sat down at the head of the table. I took the thick stack of divorce papers Preston had served me last night from their envelope. I fanned them out on the polished wood. I read every line, every clause, the 90-day stipend, the waiver of all claims, the ironclad confidentiality clause about any business information obtained during the marriage. I uncapped a heavy black fountain pen. I did not sign. Instead, I began to make notes. Next to the generous stipend, I wrote, insufficient. C. Schedule a marital asset misrepresentation. I drew a thick black line through the entire confidentiality clause. Next to it, I wrote, non-negotiable, void for conflict. By the time I was done, the document was a sea of black ink, a declaration of war. I placed the savage divorce papers on the left side of my leather blotter. I placed the 12-page immediate risk assessment on the right. I looked at the clock, 9:55 a.m. I stood and walked to the window. The predicted rain had begun. A light, misty drizzle that blurred the Chicago skyline. The glass of the conference room was fogging slightly at the edges from the warmth inside. I saw my reflection. The woman staring back was a stranger. She was not the woman in the simple navy dress. Today, I wore a bespoke suit of deep, dark charcoal blue. It was cut to perfection, severe and feminine. My hair, usually soft, was pulled back into a tight, intricate chignon at the nape of my neck. Not a single strand was out of place. This was not the wife Preston knew. This was not the cute girl with cute ideas. This was not the administrative assistant he was coming to swat out of his way. This was the version of me the Hales had never seen. The elevator chimed on the 19th floor. I heard voices. Preston's, arrogant and impatient. Arthur Klein's, a low, rumbling murmur. And a third, a woman's, sharp and anxious. They were here. I turned from the window and sat down. I placed my hands, one on each stack of paper, and I waited. The glass door to the conference room opened. Ramon, his face a perfect mask of polite professionalism, held it open. "Mr. Hale, Mr. Klein, this way, please." Preston strode in, not even looking at Ramon. He was checking his watch, a solid gold Patek Philippe I'd bought him for our second anniversary. He was visibly annoyed, radiating an impatience that meant I was an inconvenient chore on his day of triumph. Arthur Klein followed, his briefcase held in front of him like a shield. With them was a third person, a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, maybe 30, in a severe gray suit. Her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed painful. She clutched a tablet and looked stressed, her eyes darting around the office. "Let's make this fast." "Sienna." Preston snapped, stopping in the middle of the room. He didn't look at the large, glowing Lumen Cross Strategies logo on the far wall. He didn't look at the panoramic view. He just looked at me with pure irritation. "Where's your lawyer? Let's just sign and go." The woman in gray looked at her own watch. "Preston," she said, her voice sharp and anxious. "We are due at Arclight in less than 30 minutes for the 10 o'clock. We still need to prep for the meeting with Ms. West." Preston waved a dismissive hand. "It's fine. Lydia, this will take 5 minutes." He glanced around, his lip curling slightly. He was expecting, I realized, the administrative area, a warren of cubicles, a sad beige room. He wasn't prepared for the 20-foot mahogany table, the integrated media wall, the sheer, expensive silence of the space. He finally focused on me, sitting at the head of the table, in the main chair. He didn't like it. "Sienna, this is very dramatic," he said, "but it's unnecessary. I'm here. Arthur is here. Where is your desk? Let's just sign the papers. I don't have a desk." "Preston," I said. My voice was calm, and it echoed slightly in the large room. He frowned. "What you work here, don't you? This is your office building. You're mistaken." I said. I folded my hands on the leather blotter. "I don't work here. I own this place." The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur Klein, who had been opening his briefcase, froze. Lydia Caro, the finance VP, actually took a half step back, as if the air in the room had suddenly changed pressure. Preston just stared. He blinked. A quick, confused motion. The confident, impatient CEO was gone, replaced by a man who had just walked into the wrong room. What you own? This consulting firm. Please, sit down." I said. I gestured to the 3 chairs opposite me. "You too, Ms. Caro. You'll want to be here for this." "I'm not sitting down," Preston said, his voice rising. The shock was already hardening into anger. "I'm not playing this game. I am here, at your request, to sign the dissolution. That is all. We are done." "We're not," I said. I picked up the small remote next to my blotter and aimed it at the 80-inch screen on the wall. The screen flickered to life. The Lumen Cross logo faded, replaced by a title page. "Nova Pulse Clinics Acquisition. Preliminary Risk Assessment. Prepared for Arclight Bank Partners. Confidential. Eyes only. Submitted by Lumen Cross Strategies." I didn't look at Preston. I looked at Lydia Caro. Her face, already pale, turned the color of ash. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she whispered a single, sharp word. No. How did you get that? She breathed, her eyes wide with terror. That's the ArcLight internal risk deck. How do you have that? I don't have it. Ms. Caro, I said, finally turning to her. I wrote it. My firm, Lumen Cross Strategies, is the independent auditor ArcLight Bank hired to validate the Nova Pulse deal, the $180 million you're expecting to be wired in. Let's see. I checked my watch. About an hour. It's not coming. I turned my gaze back to my husband. The bank won't release a single cent. Preston, until I give the final sign-off. And as of 9 p.m. last night, I have put a hard stop on the entire transaction. The blood drained from his face, the arrogance, the impatience, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, dawning comprehension. This was not a coincidence. This was not a domestic squabble. This was an ambush. His voice was a low, dangerous growl. You've been spying on me. While you were living in my house, you've been stealing my data. That is corporate espionage. Arthur, quiet. I said, it wasn't a request. I didn't spy on you. Preston, you've been too stupid to be spied on. Your team, in their rush to get this deal approved, sent my firm your entire, unredacted data room. They've been flooding our servers for weeks, begging for an audience with the one person they thought could save this deal. I leaned forward. They've been begging to speak to Isabella West. I let the name hang in the air. The mythical name. The ghost. I said, spacing the words, am Isabella West. Lydia Caro made a small, choked sound and sank into the nearest chair. She understood. She understood everything. Arthur Klein, however, had recovered. He saw the legal attack. This is a farce, he boomed, his lawyer voice filling the room. A categorical, flagrant conflict of interest. A wife conducting secret due diligence on her own husband's company. This is inadmissible. This entire report is compromised. And so are you. We are leaving. And we will be informing ArcLight that their independent auditor is a compromised, vindictive. Sit down. Arthur. My voice was ice. He kept talking, gathering steam. This is grounds for a lawsuit that will, I said. Sit down. I clicked the remote. A new document filled the screen. It was a letter. On ArcLight Bank's letterhead. Dated 7:01 a.m. Today. This is a legal waiver. Countersigned by ArcLight's general counsel. I said, my voice cutting through his bluster. It acknowledges my full identity as Sienna Lopez Hale. It states that, due to the critical nature of my findings, they are waiving the standard conflict of interest clause and empowering me, and me alone, as the sole, binding auditor on this deal. I looked at Lydia. ArcLight is very unhappy. Ms. Caro. They don't like being lied to. They don't like discovering 3 undisclosed federal lawsuits. And they really don't like finding out their primary client has been cooking the books. Klein stopped talking. He stared at the screen. He knew what that letter meant. He was trapped. Slowly, stiffly. He sat. Preston was the only one left standing. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. He was vibrating with a rage so profound he couldn't even speak. You bitch, he finally whispered. I'm not done. I said. I clicked the remote one last time. A new slide appeared. It was simple. Just a few lines of text under the heading Breach of Covenant Personal Guarantees, and 2 names, Preston T. Hale, Judith M. Hale. I let him read it. I watched his eyes track to the assets listed as collateral, Hale Meridian Equity and Montana Lodge Holdings. The deal you presented to the bank was a fraud. Preston. I said, my voice quiet, conversational. It's toxic. Nova Pulse is bankrupt, and they're being sued by every insurance carrier in the country. You didn't just lie to your partners, you lied to your own mother. You bet her precious ski lodge on a deal you were too arrogant to even read. I stood up, slowly. So here is where we are. If I don't sign off on this deal, a deal that, as it stands, I would never, ever sign, ArcLight doesn't just walk away. They trigger the default clause on your bridge loan, the one you signed with that delightful little vulture fund in New York, The margin call will happen before lunch. Your mother's property in Montana will be seized. Gone. By Monday. I walked around the table until I was standing right in front of him. And you? You will be removed as managing director for catastrophic negligence and fiduciary failure before the markets open tomorrow. You will be wiped out. Your job, your reputation, your mother's home, your entire legacy. He stared at me. His face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. He was finally, truly seeing me. He sank into his chair, defeated. The last of his bluster was gone. He looked at the 2 stacks of papers sitting at my place, the divorce papers I had marked up, and the 12-page risk assessment that held his life. His voice was a rasp. Fine. He was a cornered animal, but he still had his arrogance. Fine. You win. This is a shakedown. You want more money in the divorce. Is that it? He nodded, trying to reclaim some shred of control. Okay, we'll play. Sign the deal. Save the company. And we'll sign your new divorce terms. He was still trying to negotiate. He still thought this was about money. He still thought he was leaving me. I just looked at him, and for the first time that morning, I smiled. I smiled at him. That same, small, cold smile from my reflection in the dark monitor. You still think this is about money. Preston, you think this is a shakedown? I let out a soft, pitying sigh. You haven't been listening. This is a rescue. Your rescue. Whether you like it or not. I walked back to my place at the head of the table. I sat down and placed my hands on the 2 stacks of paper. You came here for one signature, I said, my voice dropping back into the register of a CEO, but we have 2 items on the agenda. I slid the 12-page, spiral-bound report across the polished mahogany. This, I said, is the NovaPulse Clinic's restructuring requirement. It's the official recommendation from Lumen Cross, which ArcLight Bank is now legally bound to follow. Then, I tapped the mess of papers he had served me last night, now covered in my black ink. And this is your transition agreement. I looked him dead in the eye. I will sign your document after you have signed mine. He scoffed. A last, pathetic attempt at defiance. You'll sign both, right now. No, I said. The word final. My priorities today are very clear. Preston, my first priority is to protect my family's name from the humiliation you and your mother engineered. My second priority is to protect my client, which, in this case, is the bank from the catastrophic, fraudulent, and frankly idiotic deal you are trying to ram through. We will address the business first, then we will address the family. I pushed the restructuring document closer to him. My report to ArcLight, which I am sending the moment you leave this room, will recommend proceeding only under these new conditions. Please feel free to read them. Ms. Caro, Lydia, the finance VP. Snatched the document, her hands shaking slightly. She began to read, her eyes growing wider with every line. 1. I recited from memory. A purchase price reduction of 22% to reflect the actual, non-fraudulent valuation of NovaPulse, accounting for their undisclosed liabilities. 22% Klein exploded. That's insulting. They'll never accept 2. I continued, ignoring him. A mandatory 60-day delay in closing, pending the independent resolution of the 3 federal lawsuits my team uncovered, during which time Hale Meridian will fund a compliance audit to be overseen by my firm. 60 days Klein was on his feet. That's a deal killer. Absolutely not. NovaPulse will walk. They have other offers. This isn't a restructuring. Mrs. Hale, this is sabotage. Lydia looked up, her face stricken. He's right. Preston, their exclusivity window with us closes on Friday. They'll just go to the next bidder. We'll lose it. No, I said, my voice cutting through their panic. They won't. I clicked the remote. The screen lit up again. This time, it wasn't a slide. It was a copy of an email, a very private email. This, I said, is a message sent 2 days ago from the CEO of NovaPulse to his private lender in New York, the one you clearly didn't know about. Ms. Caro, as you can see, they are currently 31 days past due on a $20 million high-interest note. They are bleeding $7 million a month in cash. They cannot make payroll next Friday. I looked at Lydia. Her financial model brain was spinning, recalculating everything. Novapulse isn't walking. Ms. Caro, they're praying. They are seconds from insolvency. They can't afford to walk to the bathroom, let alone to another bidder. They will take the 22% haircut, and they will wait the 60 days, because their only other option is Chapter 11. Am I wrong? Lydia Caro stared at the screen. She said nothing. She had been beaten with her own weapon data. And 3, I said, my voice softening as I delivered the final, personal blow. The immediate conversion of all personal guarantees, specifically yours, Preston, and your mother's, to a standard, ring-fenced corporate guarantee. The Montana Lodge is off the table. The Hale family assets are no longer part of this equation. I leaned forward. And this, Preston, is the part that really matters to you. You tried to time this, didn't you? You wanted me legally severed, gone, with no claim. Before you signed your big deal and became a hero, you wanted a clean balance sheet. But now, you can't sign. The deal is dead as it stands. You must sign this restructuring, and this restructuring will be signed, filed, and dated today, while I am still, legally, your wife, while I am still Mrs. Hale. He finally got it. The full, exquisite trap. He couldn't get rid of me. If he divorced me first, I'd walk away, and his company would implode. He needed me. He needed me, his wife, to save his company, the very wife he tried to dispose of like trash. He was silent. He just stared at the document. He was trapped between his crushing ego, the terror of his mother, and the absolute certainty of his own financial annihilation. He looked at Klein, his eyes desperate. Arthur? The lawyer just shook his head. A single, minute gesture. We have no move. Preston looked at Lydia. She had finished reading. She closed the document and placed it gently on the table. She looked at Preston, not with fear, but with the cold, hard gaze of a pragmatist who has just seen the only path out of a burning building. Preston, she said, her voice flat. She's right. About the valuation, about the lawsuits, about the private note. She's right about all of it. If we don't follow her structure, ArcLight won't just deny the funding. They will launch a full investigation into our initial filing. We have to sign this. There is no other option. Preston looked like he was going to be sick. You're just going to roll over, he snarled at her. This isn't rolling over. Preston, this is survival, Lydia snapped, her professional terror overriding her fear of him. She's already confirmed it. Anyway, I added, my voice light. Lydia looked at me, confused. What I called Mr. Garrison at ArcLight before you arrived. I explained. I informed him of my dual role. I informed him of my findings. He was quite upset. He is waiting, as we speak, for one thing, and one thing only, a new, executed term sheet, signed by you, Preston. Reflecting the exact structure I've outlined in this document, I have an email, received 10 minutes ago, confirming ArcLight will not approve, fund, or even discuss any other version of this deal. This is it. Checkmate. Lydia let out the breath she'd been holding. I had already called the bank. The checkmate was declared before they even sat down. Preston stared at the document. The rage had burned out, leaving something hollow and cold. He was beaten. He knew it. His mother's house, his father's company, his entire future. It was all tied up in the document my pen had authored. His voice was a rasp. Give me the pen. I didn't smile. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I uncapped my heavy black fountain pen and slid it, along with the 12-page restructuring requirement, across the table. I watched him. His hand was shaking, the strong, confident hand that had lifted a champagne glass to honor my family. He signed the last page. His signature was angry, cramped. He signed away 22% of his prize. He signed away his triumphant timeline. He signed, saving his company and his mother's home, all at the command of the wife he thought he was throwing away. He shoved the document back at me. the pen rattling against the wood. There, he spat. It's done. You saved the deal. You get your victory. Now. The divorce. Sign it. We're done. I calmly pulled the restructuring document toward me. I inspected his signature. I nodded, satisfied. I closed the cover. I then looked at the stack of divorce papers, the ones he was demanding I sign. I placed my hand on them, but I didn't pick up the pen. I slid them slowly to my side of the blotter. Still unsigned. Preston tensed. What are you doing? I signed yours. Sign mine. I looked up at him, my gaze level and cold. That, I said, tapping the restructuring document, was business. A professional matter. I've just saved your company from your own incompetence. You're welcome. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. Good. Now we talk about my family. Business is handled, I said, my voice quiet. Now, as I said, we talk about my family. Preston's face tightened. There is nothing to talk about. I signed your ridiculous terms. You saved your client. You won. Now sign the divorce papers. Sienna, it's over. It's not over, I said. I reached into my purse, retrieved my personal cell phone, and slid it onto the polished table. It looked small and insignificant next to the towering stacks of corporate documents. I tapped the screen. A video file opened. I hit play. The sound that filled the silent, high-stakes conference room was not of data or finance. It was the low, ambient murmur of the Lakeview Conservatory, the clink of heavy silverware, and then a man's voice, cold and gravelly. Arthur Klein's voice. Mrs. Hale. This is the asset settlement. Mr. Hale wanted to ensure full transparency before both families. I had muted the phone's audio, but I didn't need it. The video was enough. Mariella had been recording the moment Preston raised his glass for the toast, and she hadn't stopped. The camera had been on her lap, pointed up. It showed Arthur Klein placing the folder on the table. It showed the folder being pushed, sliding across the tablecloth and stopping just inches from my father's hand. It showed my mother's face collapsing, and it showed my father, his back rigid, staring at the documents, his pride, his dignity, just shattering in public. I let it play for 10 seconds. Then I stopped it. I pushed the phone to the center of the table. Last night, I said, my voice dangerously calm, you and your mother, with Mr. Klein as your instrument, staged a public spectacle. You didn't just serve me papers. You intentionally and maliciously humiliated my family. You dragged my parents, people who have only ever shown you respect, into a corporate theater of cruelty. You made them involuntary witnesses to your power play. I looked at Preston. You will fix it. Preston let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Fix it. It's a divorce. It's done. I'm not fixing anything. Yes, you are, I said. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my own folder. It was a new list. You have 2 options. Preston, you can sign the addendum I've prepared, or I can walk back into my office, pick up the phone, and add a final codicil to my report for ArcLight. Your choice. Klein leaned forward, his eyes narrow. A codicil. What are you talking about? I'm talking about governance, I said, shifting my gaze to the lawyer. My report currently saves this deal by restructuring the finances, but I have not yet submitted my final sign-off on management. ArcLight is very interested in the, let's call it the erratic judgment of Hale Meridian's CEO, a man who stages public ambushes, involves civilians, and exposes his firm to moral and ethical liabilities. I'm sure the bank's board would love to know that their new partner's CEO is a walking public relations disaster, a reputational risk. Lydia Caro's head snapped up. She understood. That kind of language in a final auditor's report was a death sentence. It would give the bank grounds to demand new leadership. What do you want? Klein asked, his voice now tight. He saw the trap. My demands are simple. They are non-negotiable, and they will be attached as a legally binding addendum to the restructuring document you just signed. I spelled it out. 1. Hale Meridian Ventures will host a thank-you dinner for the Lopez family at the Lakeview Conservatory in the main dining room You will pay for it. You, Preston, and your mother, Judith, will attend. And you will toast my father." Preston's face went white. He saw it immediately. This wasn't a request. This was a ritual of humiliation. His own. Served cold. He would have to restage his night of triumph as a public apology. 2. I continued. Within 24 hours, your head of corporate communications will circulate an internal company-wide memo. That memo will state that I, Sienna Lopez, was instrumental in identifying the risks of the Novapulse acquisition and played a key role in supporting the successful transition and restructuring. Absolutely not. Preston slammed his hand on the table. You're rewriting history. You're putting your name on my deal. I'm saving your deal, I corrected him, and you are going to acknowledge it. My family, the people you tried to convince that I was a penniless failure, will see that memo. The narrative you created last night ends today. And 3, I said, looking directly at Arthur Klein. This is for your other client. Judith Hale will sign a personal letter, which you will draft and notarize today, guaranteeing that no member of the Lopez family, nor any of their assets, will ever be pursued or implicated in any financial dispute related to this divorce. It will also include a clause stating, for the record, that I, Sienna Lopez, have waived all claims to any further marital compensation. Klein actually looked relieved. He saw this as an exit. This is superficial. It's optics. Preston? Annoying. But it's not financial. It's a PR fix. It even states she waives further claims. Just sign it. Let's get out of here. It is not superficial, Preston roared, his voice cracking. He was looking at me, his eyes burning with a hatred that was almost pure. She wants to humiliate me. She wants me to crawl in front of them. I want you to correct the record you falsified. Preston, I said, why are you doing this? He whispered. The question raw. Why escalate this? This is family. This is us. I leaned across the table. My voice was just as quiet. But it was steel, because you escalated this in front of my father. You brought your lawyer to dinner. You put a price tag on my family's dignity. I'm just fixing the invoice. There was a heavy, suffocating silence. Lydia Caro, the pragmatist, finally broke. She looked at Preston, her face pale but resolved. Preston, sign the addendum. Sign it. Right now. Lydia, stay out of this. He spat. I will not, she said, her voice rising with the panic of a woman watching a deadline evaporate. Mr. Garrison from Arclight has been texting my phone every 2 minutes for the last half hour. He is waiting for her final, executed plan. If she adds that governance risk clause, the deal is dead, not restructured. Preston, dead. Your mother's lodge, the company, all of it. This dinner, this memo. It's the price. Pay it. We are out of time. Preston looked from Lydia's desperate face to Klein's resigned one. He looked at me, the woman who had been invisible for 5 years, now sitting at the head of his execution. He was beaten, completely. He had no moves left. Draft the addendum. Arthur, he said, his voice a dead, empty monotone. It took Klein 10 minutes. He wrote it out by hand, on a fresh sheet of legal paper, titling it Addendum B Governance and Community Commitments. It included all 3 of my demands. I read it. I nodded. Ms. Caro, you will sign as a corporate witness. She signed, her hand flying. Mr. Klein, you will sign as counsel. He signed, his mouth a thin, grim line. Preston, you sign. He picked up the pen. He signed his name to the document that guaranteed his own humiliation. I took the addendum. I stapled it, with a loud, definitive thunk, to the back of the 12-page restructuring plan. It was done. The business was tied to the family. My victory was now a legal part of his company's future. Preston slumped in his chair, exhausted, hollowed out. He looked at the original divorce papers, still sitting by my elbow, the ones he'd served me at dinner, the ones I had covered in black ink. There, he rasped. You've won. You've taken the deal. You've taken my dignity. You've protected your family. Are you satisfied? Can we be done? He pointed a shaking finger at the papers. Just sign it, please. Sign the divorce. I looked at him. Then I looked down at the stack of papers. The ones that would set him free. I picked them up. I squared the edges. And I just held them. The private dining room at the Chicago Riverside Hotel was a mausoleum. It was our thank you dinner. The one I had demanded. The one Hale Meridian Ventures was paying for. It was, by any definition, a victory, but it felt like a ceasefire on a frozen battlefield. The food was exquisite, untouched. We were all there. My family, papa, mama. Mariela sat on one side of the long, dark table. They were dressed in the same clothes as the night before, but their posture was different. They were no longer trying to impress. They were wary, confused, and sitting in a silence that was almost as loud as their shame had been. On the other side sat the Hales. Preston, his face a tight mask of controlled fury, stared at his water glass as if it had personally insulted him, and next to him, Judith. She had been forced to attend, and every line of her body screamed its displeasure. Arthur Klein sat at the end of the table, a neutral, expensive observer, here to witness the good faith of the agreement. The tension was so thick you could have cut it with the sterling silver knives. Judith, clearly deciding to get the performance over with, raised her glass of mineral water. Her diamonds flashed in the dim, strategic lighting. "Well," she said, her voice like ice cubes rattling in a glass, "we are all here. I suppose we should thank Sienna." She looked at me, her eyes completely dead. "Preston has informed me that your assistance in the Nova Pulse transition was helpful. Thank you for your support of the family. Assistance. Helpful." The words of a woman describing a temp worker who had collated papers correctly. It was the smallest, meanest insult she had left to give. Mama and Papa nodded, not understanding the nuance. They just wanted this to be over. They wanted to go home. Preston didn't move. He was just waiting for me to accept this final, pathetic crumb of humiliation so he could leave. He thought this was the end. He thought he had paid his penance by signing my restructuring deal and sitting through this dinner. My secure phone, the one on my lap, vibrated. I glanced down. It was a coded text from Ramon, who I had brought and introduced as my associate. He was sitting near Klein, silent, watching. The message was short. Boss. NVPELX filed. Revised disclosure. It's public. They're idiots. They added a line. Risk factors previously identified and flagged by Isabella West. My blood went cold. They had put the name in the filing, the official, public filing for the bank. Isabella West, my ghost. Lydia Caro would see that. The bankers at Arclight would see it. The name was now officially tied to the Hale Meridian deal. I looked up. Preston was staring at me, his eyes demanding, "Say thank you. End this." I finally understood. The lie had to end. The two worlds had to merge. My restructuring agreement, the one they signed this morning, had my name on it, Sienna Lopez. But the audit that gave me the power was authored by Isabella West. If I didn't connect those two dots, right now, Preston and his mother would spend the rest of their lives spinning the story. They would say Isabella West was some third-party auditor, and that I, Sienna, had somehow seen her report and used it to blackmail them. They would never admit the truth. The secret was no longer a shield. It was a liability. It was time to set the final fire. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping on the polished floor was loud, abrasive. Everyone looked at me. "Thank you." "Judith," I said, my voice clear and calm. "That's very generous of you." I placed my hands on the table. "I know this is uncomfortable. My family is sitting here, wondering what happened. Last night, you saw me humiliated, and today, you're here for a thank you dinner that my husband was forced to pay for." Papa looked at me, his eyes pained. "Mija, please. It's okay." "Papa," I said, "I need you to hear this. I need you all to hear this. The dinner last night, the humiliation, it was a business tactic. Preston needed me legally gone, with no claim to his assets, before he signed a $180 million deal this morning. Preston's head snapped up, his eyes burning. Sienna, don't. The problem, I continued, ignoring him, is that the deal was a fraud. The company he was buying was bankrupt. He was about to lose everything, his company, his reputation, and, Judith, your lodge in Montana. Judith's composure finally cracked. How dare you, she hissed, her voice low and furious. You have no position to speak of this family's finances. You are nothing but a what, Judith? I asked. A hard-working girl. A cute idea. The admin. You're right. Sienna Lopez, the admin, has no position. But I do. I turned to the small, flat-screen television mounted on the wall, the one meant for corporate presentations. I pulled the small remote from my pocket. Ramon had already synced my laptop. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It wasn't a video. It was a scanned document. A single page. Addendum, a Nova Pulse restructuring requirement, and at the bottom, 3 signatures, stark and clear in high definition. Preston T. Hale, Judith M. Hale, Lydia Caro, witness. My mother gasped. Papa stood up from his chair to see it better. He looked at the screen, then at me. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the signatures. He understood power. Mariella. Mariella was smiling, a slow, brilliant, dangerous smile. This morning, I said, addressing my parents but staring at my husband. Preston and Judith were in my office, at my company, Lumen Cross Strategies. They signed this document, which I wrote. The document that saved their company. The document that saved their assets from the single worst business decision of Preston's life. I looked at Preston. His face was gray. The narrative was dead. The story he had told himself, his mother. The world that I was a simple, supportive admin had just evaporated. He could never tell that lie again. The bank hired my firm to audit the deal. I said, my voice ringing in the silent room. They hired me to find the truth. They hired the ghost everyone in Chicago is afraid of. They hired Isabella West. I pointed to myself. I am Isabella West. My family stared. Comprehension dawning. This was not a woman being saved. This was the savior. I turned to Preston. His eyes were hollow. Now, I said, I will sign the divorce papers. I walked to the end of the table where Arthur Klein sat. He had the leather-bound folder from last night, the one he had shoved in front of my father. He opened it, his hands shaking slightly. He held out the signature page. I took my own pen from my jacket. I walked back to my seat, the paper in my hand. I looked right at Preston, his hatred, his arrogance. It was all gone, replaced by nothing. He was a shell. I am signing this, I said, my voice clear and precise for everyone to hear. But not because you pushed me out, not because you humiliated me, not because you won. I uncapped the pen. I'm signing this because I just protected your entire legacy from you. I signed my name, Sienna Lopez. The stroke was clean, fast, and final. I looked up. Across the table, Mariella had her phone raised. The small red light was on. She was filming. She was documenting this. Not the humiliation, the liberation. I capped my pen. I walked the single sheet of paper back to Arthur Klein and placed it on the table in front of him. We are done. I turned and looked at Preston Hale, my husband, for the last time. His eyes met mine. There was no anger. There was no fight. There was just defeat, the absolute, profound, and bottomless look of a man who knew, finally and completely, that he had lost. I placed the signed divorce paper on the table in front of Arthur Klein. We are done. Preston visibly slumped, a puppet with his strings cut. He started to push his chair back, a low scraping sound of wood on wood. Judith was already gathering her purse, her face a mask of stone, desperate to flee this room, this humiliation. Oh, I'm sorry, I said, my voice light, conversational. It stopped them cold. Preston froze. his hand on the back of his chair. "Preston, you're not quite done. You and Judith, please sit back down. There is one final piece of business. It's a formality, really." They sat, reluctantly, their movements stiff with resentment. "As you know," I said, "the restructuring you signed this morning is contingent on my firm's final audit report. That report will be filed with ArcLight Bank at 8 a.m. tomorrow. The financial part is settled." I smiled at Lydia, who was still present, still witnessing. But there is, of course, the governance review. I let the word governance hang in the air. Arthur Klein's head snapped up. He knew what that meant. Lumen Cross will be submitting its final evaluation of Hale Meridian's current management capabilities, and in that report, I will be flagging a significant ethical and reputational risk. I looked directly at Preston. His eyes were blank, exhausted, but they snapped into focus. "I will be strongly recommending that ArcLight Bank, as the primary lender, demand a new operator for the NovaPulse project. I will be citing recent personal conduct by the current CEO that demonstrates erratic judgment and creates an unacceptable ethical and media risk." I smiled politely. The public, premeditated humiliation of a spouse, staged in front of her family. Banks get very nervous about that kind of thing. They call it key man risk. What other impulsive, vindictive decisions might he make when he's under pressure? It's a bad look. It's bad governance. This was the real bomb, the one I'd saved for last. The deal was saved. His mother's house was safe. His company was safe. But he was not. He would be forced to watch from the sidelines as someone else ran his great victory. A humiliation far deeper, far more permanent than a bad divorce. Judith finally understood. Her composure, that ironclad, aristocratic ice, shattered. You can't," she whispered, her voice paper-thin, laced with a new, raw panic. "We signed the restructuring. We agreed." "You agreed to save the deal. I did agree," I said pleasantly, "and I have. But you also signed. Judith, you signed a document, in my office, that explicitly states Hale Meridian Ventures will comply with all audit recommendations from Lumen Cross to secure the financing. You gave me the authority. This morning. You bet your company on my word, and I am giving it." Preston finally found his voice. It wasn't the roar from the office. It was a strangled, broken sound, the sound of a man who had just been disemboweled. You want to destroy me," he gurgled. "You saved the company, just to fire me." I looked at him, and all the ice, all the strategy, just fell away, leaving the simple, hard truth: destroy you. "No, Preston." I spoke very slowly, very clearly, so he would never forget it. I leaned forward. "I want you to remember. I want you to remember what it feels like to be kicked from your own table. I want you to remember what it feels like to be told you're not good enough to sit with the adults, just like you did to me, just like you did to my father." I glanced at my family, and I saw it, the confusion, the sadness. It was gone. My mother's hand was over her mouth, but her eyes were wide, and they were shining. My father was looking at me, really looking at me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he was smiling, a slow, proud, powerful smile. He understood. His daughter wasn't a victim. She wasn't a failure being returned. She was a general. She had just won the war. The room was dead silent. Arthur Klein, ever the pragmatist, cleared his throat, the sound like a rock slide. I would suggest that all parties keep this entire series of events strictly confidential, for the smooth transition of the project, and for the good of the brand. I gave him a small, magnanimous nod. "I agree, Arthur. I don't need this to be public. The power, as we've all learned, is on the paper, not in the headlines. My victory didn't need an audience. It just needed to be total." Preston said nothing. He was hollowed out. He looked like a man who had aged 40 years. Judith stood, her face a mask of marble, and without a word, she walked out of the room, Preston followed. His shoulders slumped. Not the triumphant CEO, but a man who had just been publicly dismantled. They didn't look back. The door clicked shut. The tension in the room didn't just ease. It evaporated. It was gone. Ramon let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding since morning. Mariella was just grinning at her phone, at the video she had just taken. My family stayed. Papa walked over to me, his hands in his pockets. He just looked at me for a long time, that proud, astonished smile on his face. He didn't have the words. He didn't need them. He just clapped me on the shoulder, a solid, grounding gesture that said everything. Mama came and wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight. She pulled back, her eyes wet, but not with sadness. She looked at me, really looked at me, as if for the first time. She whispered, "Just for me," her voice thick with wonder. "Mija, you were never stuck in that little admin office, were you?" I shook my head, smiling, the tears finally coming, but they were hot, cleansing tears of release. "No, Mama, I wasn't." I walked to the window, away from the table, away from the remnants of the battle. I looked out at the Chicago River, black and slick, reflecting the city lights like scattered jewels. It was over. I had lost a husband. I had lost the life I thought I had. But I had saved my family's honor. I had saved my company. And I had just taken control of the Hale family empire. My secure phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. An email from Arclight Bank. Subject confirmed. Receipt of restructuring. Hale Nova Pulse. The body was simple. "We have received the executed terms. Thank you. Ms. Lopez, we await your final governance report tomorrow." Below it, in the chain, was the file I had sent them. Hale Restructuring Final, PDF, and my approval stamp. It was digital, but it was clear. Approved Lumen Cross Strategies. Isabella West, Sienna Lopez. 3 names, 1 woman. I smiled. The revenge was complete, and I knew, as I looked out at the city, that the real story was just beginning. The story of who Sienna Lopez really was. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to connect and share our thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories. Like this video, and if you want to support us, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.